everyone. Welcome to the Horror Realm. I'm Travis Bruce, and today I have a special guest with us today. I have the authors. They have a new collection of short stories that they're collaborating with, and it's called All Hallows Eve, Nightmare Eve. I have with us today Stephen and Sharon Provo. Sharon, Stephen, welcome to the Horror Realm.
Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you.
It's a pleasure. So tell us a little bit about. It's a pleasure to have you on. Pleasure to have you on. Now, tell us a little bit about All Hallows Nightmares Eve.
Well, this is actually the third book in our Nightmares Eve series. The first one was one that I wrote myself about 5 years ago, I guess, and it was my attempt to write horror. The first time I had written horror, and so since then, we've decided to collaborate. She wanted me to write another book, and I was in the midst. I write a bunch of different types of books. I write fiction and nonfiction, so I have a lot of different things in me. And she wanted to try to convince me to do another one, and I said, you know, I think you could be real good at this, because she'd written a short story for an anthology that I put together. And I said, again, I'll make you a deal. If you write half the stories for this book, I'll write half the stories for the book, and we'll put it together. And so she took me up on it, and the result was a book called Christmas Nightmares Eve, which was our first themed book in the series. It originally was supposed to have been Shadows Gate, which is a book she subsequently wrote by herself. But we decided midway through that a lot of the stories were Christmas themed. And so we decided, why don't we make all the stories Christmas themed and go that way? And then we went with that kind of a concept, and went on with All Hallows Nightmares Eve from there, doing everything connected to Halloween.
Love it. Now, Sharon, how is it to be able to collaborate and write with your husband?
It's been really exciting. It wasn't something I'd done before. I mean, when I was a kid, like 7 or 8, I'd sit at the table and write horror, of course. You know, stupid little vampire stories. But I had gone on with life, gotten into doing animals, worked at a veterinary hospital, and then he had me write that one story, and then made me the deal, I'll write you, half the book if you write half. So I was like, I'll give it a try, and the writing bug bit me, and it's just been a lot of fun being able to do, continue this series with him.
And it must be amazing to be partners, husband and wife, and to have the same passion of writing.
Yes, it's really been nice, because he's got a lot of experience, 32 years of being a journalist and an editor. So I've got the built-in help I've needed. And while horror's not his main genre, he does enjoy reading my stuff. And so he's really been helpful in helping me finding any mistakes, and been very encouraging. So it's been really interesting going on this journey with him.
Love it.
This was the first time that I had written short stories, was for Nightmares Eve. I decided to put together a collection of short stories that was, the original concept was to pattern everything after the Twilight Zone. So it was supposed to be kind of psychological thriller with a twist, and that's the kind of story I love to write. She likes to write a little different kind of horror than I do. So our collaborations tend to be a combination of more psychological head game type thrillers, which is kind of my bailiwick, and for her, she's more into human horror, police procedural stuff, and serial killers, and a lot of blood and guts. So they're very different, but they go together really well.
But I'm rubbing off on him. He's gotten a lot more hardcore than he was in Christmas Nightmares Eve, so I'm converting him.
Now, Stephen, you've written other kinds of stories. What are the challenges? I would say, what are the pros or cons from writing horror compared to writing other genres of books or stories?
I think writing for that specific audience, Sharon has really immersed herself in the world of horror writing. And it's interesting because I have all sorts of other projects going on. I have a biography that I'm writing with a fellow. I have nonfiction books on Virginia City that I'm working on right now, and on U.S. Highway or California Highway 49. So I've got all sorts of irons in the fire. But her whole thing is horror. So I kind of watch over her shoulder and see what these people want. And I'm like really interested to find out, what does the horror community want from an author? And it's in a way, it's very different, because there's a focus on scaring people, obviously. And in the horror community she's involved in, on a lot of blood and guts. And that's not my thing naturally, but it's interesting to kind of, I always like to experiment with different styles of writing, with different genres. And so I'm always open to that. And so, but ultimately, when I'm writing something, I want to write a story that paints a picture that's compelling, that usually has a twist, because I love twists, and that fits really well into horror, and that creates compelling characters who you can feel what they're going through as you read the story. And so that's kind of universal for me. I've written science fiction and fantasy as well, and so in any one of those kinds of books, I do write genre fiction pretty much exclusively. I don't write literary, realistic fiction very much. So it's easier to jump from, say, dystopian science fiction to horror, where there are elements of horror in that, or fantasy to horror, because there are scary things in fantasy too, than it would be to jump from maybe Old West realism, or gritty in the city type books to the kind of stuff that I write.
And Sharon, there's questions for you. Actually, think I'm going to ask you the same question afterwards. What are some writing habits that you've noticed about your husband? Like, is there a certain time of day that he likes to write? Is there a certain place? Does he have to be in a certain mood that's completely different than how you do?
To a large degree, we're kind of similar. We both like to write early in the day, getting more towards evening, and just our creative juices go out the window. So we're both kind of the same in that regard. We work in the same office right next to each other. He gets really focused, and so it's hard to interrupt him, whereas I'm a multitasker by nature, and so I can talk, I can write, I can listen to music, I can do it all. So it's been a little bit of a adjustment to try and figure out the perfect working environment for both of us.
And Stephen, have you noticed any, I would say, writing scenarios that your wife, what's her perfect scenario to write in?
She likes to bounce ideas off of me, and I really enjoy doing that if it's in the first part of the day. In the second part of the day, my mind kind of starts dripping out of my skull, and so it's harder to ideas. But I do enjoy interacting with her, and we bounce ideas back and forth. And I kind of, because she's somewhat new in this, I kind of work as a little bit of a developmental editor with her, in addition to being a copy editor, which I was for many, many years. So that's kind of my expertise is as a copy editor. But I help her develop her stories, and I've just been encouraging her to, she's a very big planner, and I'm more of a pantser. And so she's worried about, for example, am I going to get enough words to create a novel? She's working on a novel right now. And so I tell her, just don't box yourself in to this or that scenario, but let your characters play with the story, and you play with the story and explore it and see where it'll go. And that way you'll get enough words, because you'll enjoy the journey, and it'll really kind of amp you up as you go along. At least that's my experience. But she's doing a great job. She's just, it's amazing to see. She's a very good technical writer, so I don't have to do a whole lot of copy editing with her. And she edits my stuff too, and she sees stuff in mine. So I'm not saying that I'm, she's a great copy editor because she's such a good technical editor. And so she's just really taken to it. She's got a novel that she's working on. She's been working on for the last month and a half or so, and it's coming along perfectly. She's got almost 30,000 words written, and I couldn't be happier to see what she's doing.
Now, Sharon, is it tough going from doing short stories into a full-on novel?
Yeah, that has been really hard for me, because just the idea of starting writing, I mean, I've only been doing it since last June, was intimidating, because it wasn't something I was used to doing technical writing within my job, but not trying to write a story. But I found that the short stories were easy for me. I could knock out a story quickly. I'm not a flash fiction person at all. So my stories tend to be, I shoot for 5 or 6 a lot of times, and next thing I know, they're 11 or 14 thousand words. So it worked out fine for me that way. It was just the thought of how do I keep going and going and going and get something 80 to 100,000 words. But I had this one story in mind that I was like, this is going to be a really long short story. We're going to go over the 14,000. I'm like, it's going to be a novella. And he's like, well, why don't you just try to go with it, add more detail, and go for a novel? And so I did, and it's working. I'm, probably a quarter of the way through my story, and like he said, close to 30,000 words. So I'm on target to be okay. I need to work on my confidence.
Because I could imagine. Listen, I'm not a writer, but I could imagine that doing a novel would be easier than a short story because you have time to develop the story. With a short story, you have a short amount of time to get that beginning, middle, end, and you got to put it all in a short amount of time.
Yeah, with working on this project, that's kind of what I'm finding. Because in my short story, sometimes I was trying to keep it within that short story range and finding it hard, wanting to include more details. And so it was always kind of a battle of where do I stop? How much do I include? And now I'm finding that if I just relax and, like you said, follow the story, as I'm sitting there, it's like the characters are talking to me. I hear the dialogue in my head and know where the story's going, and it just changes. I have a plan initially, and very often I'm dramatically different by the time I get done writing.
Now, I'm going to ask you both a controversial question that's going on in indie writing right now. There is a influx of AI writing and AI covers and AI everything. What do both of you feel about that? How do you feel about that?
I don't like it. I think that they've used authors' works to train their AI robots without the author's permission. I think that's theft, quite frankly, and I don't like it. I think anytime you introduce something that's an automated option to something that people are doing for a living, it's difficult. But it's especially difficult when you're an artist, because if they're trying to mimic art is a human function. It's something that comes out of the human soul, if you will, if you believe in a soul. I don't know that I do, but it comes out of inside of you, and it's unique to you. And I feel very protective of that. And so I don't like AI. In fact, in our books, I specifically put a disclaimer that no AI was used in the production of this book, because it's very important to me that people know that this was written by a human being. And also you start flooding the market with all these AI type books that are not written by human beings, and often you can tell they're not written by human beings, but there's more competition, and art is a very difficult thing to make a living in as it is. So adding this other layer of competition, which is profiting large corporations, not artists, I have a problem with that.
I agree, and it's just when you see it on the nonfiction side, when they're trying to sell a book as a how-to manual, or like we read a story where a lawyer actually used like ChatGPT to write his argument, and it cited different case law that didn't exist. And it was noticed, and the judge went after him for it. So I hate the idea of the misinformation that can happen. And I just know I put my heart and soul into my stories. There's a piece of me literally multiple places throughout all of my stories, whether I'm doing research on a character's name because I want to come up with a name that kind of gives you an idea of their character. If you were to happen to look it up or know, you'd realize that says something about that person. Or I put little Easter eggs, things that are part of my life or that I like or dislike. Just because I like to put me in my stories. So just the idea of something fake out there trying to recreate my writing it would bother me. I'm just not a fan of it.
Yeah, do both of you think that is going to be the wave of the future, unfortunately?
Scary. It seems like it's going that way. It just seems to be something that you're encountering more and more often.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah, because I've talked to several small presses, and they say that they're absolutely refusing AI stories, and because, like both of you said, it's taken away spots and spotlights, putting on actual writers who are putting their heart and soul, and there is only but so many spots for human writers.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's well and good, and I can commend those small presses for taking that stance. The problem comes in when you have a number of independent authors out there who don't have the scruples to say, "Hey, I'm not going to do this." They just want to make a quick buck. And I don't want to trash indie authors, because I'm an indie author myself. We're both indie authors. We write for our own publishing company, and we produce our own work. And we have the expertise to be able to do that, because I've been in journalism, as she said, for 32 years, and I know how to lay out a book, I know how to edit, I know how to write, and so I can do all of that. But there are a lot of people out there who can't, and may want to take a shortcut, say, "Hey, I want to get published. I don't care about the ethics of it," for example. And because there's so many different people working for a piece of the pie in publishing and in writing, there's always the danger that people will go out and do that.
And one thing that, disheartening to me is I have the opportunity to get my stories out there. I've got the editor, I've got the person that's used to publishing that can help me get my stories out. Not everybody has access to that, doesn't have access to be able to afford to have an editor go over their story if they wrote it, or don't have the knowledge to know how to publish it themselves. So they depend on different periodicals that are out there that will publish their short stories so that they can at least get their voice out there. And that's another thing we've read about, is several of them out there are getting so flooded with AI stories that they've shut down to taking submissions. So people are losing the opportunity to have their stories published, and that's terrible.
And I don't want to come off as though I'm anti independent publishing, because I'm actually very pro independent publishing. I run an anthology that we publish every year that is open to pretty much anybody here in Northern Nevada, and we want to get new writers out there, traditionally published or independently published. There's a lot of room for good storytellers out there, and I don't care whether you're independently published or traditionally published. It doesn't matter to me. There's good talent in both of those pools. It's just a question of making sure we get eyes on that talent and not on AI non-talent.
Exactly. So now one other thing I wanted to bring up, and I it's a big issue right now also too in the indie writing community, is the use or the importance of using an editor. There's a lot of self-published authors who don't see the importance of purchasing an editor, paying for editor service, using the editor. What can you tell those authors? How important is it to have an editor?
Well, you're talking to an editor here, so
yes, exactly.
It's actually very important. When I worked in a newspaper, these were professional writers who'd been in the business for 10, 15, 20 years, and they went through 4 edits for each story they did, and I was the last edit on them. And so that shows you how important an editor is for a seasoned veteran writer. And so my cat wants to get in the picture. She's an attention hog. But I totally sympathize with the fact that editors are expensive, because I offer editing services for basically the same rate that anybody else does. I looked at the market rates. I don't do it very often because I don't have time to do it with all the writing I'm doing. And it's not a priority for me. But I know how much an editor costs. So I understand that it's difficult for an independent writer to do that kind of thing, to engage an editor. We are very lucky. I mean, she's as I say, she's a great technical writer. So she can go through and edit my stuff. When I was working on a book called Crimson Scourge, which is my dystopian science fiction novel, she noticed a huge plot hole. And she said, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense given what you said up back here. And I said, shoot, you're right. And I'm so glad she looked at it, because if you don't have somebody look at it, people will miss that stuff. If you can't afford an editor, at least get beta readers to look at your book and send out art copies and get friends to look at it. That's better than nothing. If you can't afford it, I totally understand how much things cost these days. So that's my take on it, I guess.
And yeah, I totally agree with him, especially being the new writer. I have that perspective. You know, like you said, I may write well technically, but, you know, just getting used to the fact that everybody has their quirks, certain little flaws they do, whether it's using too many adverbs, using was too often. There's something that everybody does, and you don't see it yourself until somebody else points it out. And plot holes, like you said, they're too easy to have a little tiny plot hole come up. Or, for instance, like I was saying, how my stories will change dramatically along the way. I had that happen with one of my favorite stories that turned out really well and creeped out, you know, my friends who read it. But I was originally going a different way, and I had added a paragraph early on that was talking about the direction it was going to go. Well, it changed dramatically so that was no longer something that mattered. Now, would it have been confusing or a problem in the story? Ultimately, no. But anybody who was reading along eventually would be like, well, why did she mention that, since she never went back to it? And I'm that kind of reader. It bothers me when I catch things where I'm like, okay, why did you mention this? And then you never dealt with it. And I had totally forgotten I put it in there, but he caught it. So it's really helpful to have somebody read your work. Like you said, at the very least, you know, get a friend, or like, we're part of the Books of Horror Facebook group. There's a lot of people in there that are willing to read your story, give you information as far as any plot holes they'll see. They'll even give you editing, as far as technical editing information if you want, and review it for you. So that's, you know, at least on the horror side, that's a good option, is find somebody that way.
And even if you have a number of editors, something is likely to slip through, and you'll see it. And I'll give you an example. I'm doing a book on Virginia City back in the Comstock era, when they were discovering all the silver out here. You've heard of Mark Twain, I'm sure. Mark Twain wrote the introduction to a book by a guy named Dan DeQuille, who he worked with as a journalist before Mark Twain was famous. Dan DeQuille wrote the definitive book on the Comstock boom in Virginia City. And he dedicated it to a guy named Mackey, who was the richest guy on the Comstock. He was basically a billionaire back in the day. And he dedicated it to this guy. He spelled his name wrong in the dedication. And I noticed it when I'm looking this up. This is 150 years ago. And I noticed it, and I'm thinking, even this guy, who was a veteran journalist at the time, who wrote a book that he showed to Mark Twain, made a mistake and he had editors at a publishing house, made a mistake that got through. He misspelled the guy's name throughout. And it's just hilarious to me. Something's going to get through, and you can't feel too bad about it if you put it through editors and something gets through. There are people out there who will just get on your case and will castigate you for one little error in your book. And you can't let that get you, because everybody makes mistakes. And as much of a stickler as I am for making sure you get everything right as an editor myself, I also understand that I make mistakes, and they do get through, and it's okay, as long as you know how to tell a good story and you don't make a ton of them.
And the helpful thing is, if you're in indie publishing, you can go back and fix that.
Exactly. Because you got print on demand, and that is... Our cat jumped on, in our editing process, our cat jumped on the keyboard and put several, like 7 or 8 characters in a book that got published. And one of our readers pointed out, "What is this?" I said, "Oh, I know what that is." So, and now they're the ones that we put out initially are collector's items that were contributed to by editor Freya.
But I agree with both of you. Like, I read a lot of indie horror novels, any horror channel. But I mean, it's some of them who don't get at it. It's not even noticeable. That okay, you should see it. Something I misspelled, or you just keep on reading. But I've read. I'm reading one right now, and I'm struggling through it. And there's pages of run-on sentences. I mean, just one whole page is one sentence, and there's big old loopholes that and I'm going back wait, did I miss something? Like they're talking about he's from, let's say, California. How do you get California? I don't remember. Where did that come from? And it fucks up the whole entire story to me. I mean, as a reader.
It pulls you out. You get distracted, and then you get even more lost.
Yes, I know.
I hate run-on sentences. One of the things that I like to do as a writer is be conversational, and I like to write punchy stories that keep the story moving along. There are some people who like long, descriptive sections of a story. I'm not among them. I like to weave the description in with the dialogue, so that the reader is pushed along in the story, pulled along in the story, rather than feeling like, oh my gosh, what's this guy describing here? Why is he going into such detail about this? If I go into a lot of detail about something, it better be important to the story, or I'm wasting your time.
Yeah. All right. Stephen, Sharon, where can everyone find you on social media?
My Facebook page is Sharon Marie Provo, author. So you can find me there. You can find both of us on, dragoncrownbooks.com.
Yeah.
And we're also under Dragon Crown on Instagram and TikTok.
And I'm at Stephen H. Provo, author. That's my Facebook page. I'm primarily on Facebook, but I do occasionally go on to other social media. She's my social media coordinator, so she handles most of that. But I am active on. You'll find me on Facebook.
And where can we find your books?
Our books are all available on our website, dragoncrownbooks.com. They're all on Amazon. That's the easiest place to find them. Many of my books are my nonfiction books, and some of my fiction books are available at local bookstores here. There's a bookstore called Luminary down in Minden, Gardnerville, which is a little bit south of Carson City. It carries a lot of my fiction. But I've got my nonfiction books in 50 bookstores around Nevada and in some in California as well.
Nice. And by the way, the link to their website is down in the description box. So please click on it, and please go out and grab your copy of All Hallows Nightmares. Stephen, Sharon, this has been a pleasure having you on.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. We've really had a lot of fun.
Thank you. Listen, you guys can come back on anytime.
Awesome. Thank you. Great to meet you.
Okay. All right, everyone. Well, thank you for coming to the Horror Room. I'm Travis Bruce, and that is Stephen and Sharon Provo. We'll see you next time. Take care.